I want to tell us just a short story to give some context about myself and Mike today. So there's this interesting story about Einstein where he traveled across Europe. He gave speeches about the theory of relativity, and his driver literally like drove him to every school, and they presented at every school, and he always stood at the back and listened to Einstein giving these speeches. And what happened was, after like 50 presentations, they were on their way to the next school, and the driver told Einstein, like, listen, I really can't believe that we are going to do this again. Like, I know this speech by heart. Like, I can seriously go and give this class on relativity. And Einstein had quite a nice humor, so he entertained the idea. So he said, you know what, that sounds like a brilliant idea. I think we should do this. And what happened was, like, the driver was keen to do it. So he just mentioned that, let's do that. And they stopped at the school, and Einstein said, well, here's my jacket, and I'll stand at the back and just watch you perform, And the driver gave him his hat, and this driver went onto the stage at the school, and he gave like an amazing speech about relativity. And some people cried, others did like a slow clap, and some people screamed and whatever. And there was one guy in the stage, and he wanted to kind of question him a bit. He wanted to ask him a really difficult question. And the driver was thinking, yeah, that's quite a difficult question in his head. But he looked at the professor in the stage, and he said, that might sound like a really difficult question, but it's actually so easy that I'm going to ask my driver to answer this one. So on that note, like, if you have any questions, I'll ask my driver in the back here, Mike, that will be presenting with me today. And yeah, I just want to quickly introduce myself as well. So I'm an Agile coach here in Wellington at a company called Park. We develop games. And yeah, I think on that, my only passion is to work with people and help enable people to maximize their potential at the end of the day. And I'm going to ask Mike to quickly introduce himself as well.
Sure. Thanks, Anton. Oh, you've got that echo back. Maybe just mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Mike. I'm an Agile coach and trainer with Agile 42. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. And yeah, I wish I could say my only passion was working with people, but sometimes, I don't know, people just get a bit much. So actually one of my greatest passions is music and design. So I'm building synthesizers just for fun and teaching myself electronics. So yeah. But otherwise, lots of organizational change and hopefully some improvements along the way.
Yeah, I like that, Mike. Awesome. Thanks. Cool. So let's get this started. So what brought me here today was a couple of things, but I think just to give some context. So there was a challenge in my head that was raised by a couple of coaches, and they had a couple of points that they mentioned. So some of the coaches that I met told me that they have coaches embedded in teams for 6 months, and then once the coaches leave the teams actually fall back into their old habits. Yeah, that was pretty interesting for me. And other coaches also said we have a maturity radar, and once teams improve in one area, they actually weaken in others. And there was also a coach that I met that told me that we used to be great, but things change and people work across the road now. and somebody else told me there's a video, you can be better than Spotify. They reverted back, you know. So those were kind of challenges that I was aware of, and yeah, that kind of just framed my mind at one point about the problems that some people are facing, you know. And I've also seen that, where I've been in teams, help them with something, and then a couple of months later, you know, I just hear that they are back with where they started with something. Yeah, so this is kind of like what we want to cover today, just to give you some context and just so you know what to expect. So the first thing is just this journey of mine and rats and Fruit Loops. I promise you it's connected. There's a link and I'll share that with you later on. So just want to leave it there for now. But yeah, there's some neuroplasticity things connected to that, and then what impacts us as humans, and then my conclusion and learnings from this journey that I wanted to share with you today. And then Mike will also discuss, you know, culture and leadership, and maybe give you some ideas and things to think about how you can impact your organization. Yeah, so on that note, I'm gonna kick us off. And this is basically the start, and that's why I called it the post, because I was scrolling through LinkedIn and I came across this post that's Quincy Jordan made, and it was pretty interesting for me because he, in his post, he mentioned that, you know, he said agile transformations require maintenance. Otherwise, your people are likely to revert back to the same problems and behaviors, especially when the broader environment hasn't really changed. And that's really something that stuck with me. But the reason why it stuck was because of this video and analogy. So I want to share this with you. It's pretty interesting, and I'm going to play it. So just kind of bear with me on this. So here you can see he's trying to pull the sheep out of the ditch. Pretty painful, best intentions to help the sheep. And yeah, so perfect analogy for me, like, you know, just thinking about us wanting to try to help teams, you know, having the best intentions, and then painfully, yeah, you can see them actually going back to some. Let's quickly exit this. Yeah. So that was really interesting for me, but also kind of in a sad way funny.
It's remarkable resemblance, Shane.
Yeah, awesome. So Mike, I'm just going to ask if you can maybe help us. So we want to quickly go out and do a breakaway session. We want you just to kind of, you know, think about this that I've just shown, and just share your experiences with change not sticking in teams. You know, what have you seen? I think be a really good discussion if we can quickly do that. So how this will work is we'll
lack of leadership buy-in. Imagine that. We've got cool ideas, we want to change, and sadly, the senior leadership helps us to stay the course rather than change. Revert back to command and control so easily, yes. And yeah, which makes one wonder, well, where are those commands coming from? Probably not the janitor. Make them agile, leave me alone. Use of daily goals, targets at an individual level to experience accomplishment. Yeah. So there, yeah, I mean, it looks like a number of stories of reversion, and I think that's that's kind of the point, right? I saw a comment, change is hard, and most certainly it is, right? There's the saying, change is inevitable, and I refute that. Change is one of the things that we actually don't like until it's over sometimes, right? But going through the pain is real. Cool. So thanks everyone. Let's bomb back into Anton's exciting talk, because yeah, there's some really cool stuff ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so like we always do, we end up back in Google when we want to search for something or get more information on something. So interestingly enough, I came across this Harvard Business Review from Amy Gallo, which was about when your team revert to the old strategy. And what she mentioned was really interesting for me, that only 5% of large-scale changes actually work, and that the issue of regression is actually a common one. So that was really interesting for me. I think, yeah, that's quite shocking. Yeah, so the problem was obviously much bigger. So going on to the next topic, and now we're getting into the really interesting stuff, the Fruit Loops. So, and I just want to iterate again, it is connected in some way. So just follow the journey. Yeah, I'm going to show the video and just leave you with that to kind of think about it, think about this for a while. Yeah, so this video is about rats that they're actually trained to drive. So here you can see there's a rat in a car, and it's actually aiming to go for a Fruit Loop. So there's enriched environment that we'll speak about now. There's a rat eating his Fruit Loop, the reward, and you can actually see it was so much fun that he actually jumped into the car himself to go and get the Fruit Loop. So there's some copper wires there that they use to steer the cars as well, which is pretty interesting. And they built this car themselves because the neuroscientist, and because they couldn't find anything on Amazon, so they just built this little car so that they can see if rats can actually drive cars. Yes, some really interesting stuff. So when I get into a bit more into the detail of this, just to give you some context about what that was actually about. So Dr. Kelly Lambert did a TED talk about this, where she explained that they had these two groups of rats. One group that was put into enriched environment, which it's like a small kind of Disney World thing where really has all the toys and everything that you can think of when you're a rat. And in the other environment was just a normal environment. So that's the two pictures you can see on the slide. The thing was that the rats in the enriched environment were given a couple of challenges to earn their Fruit Loops every day. So they were given these small little challenges, and the rats would have to solve this challenge to actually get to their 4 Fruit Loops. And they managed to create like a reward system for these rats. And they found that these rats were naturally more curious. They were interested in the environment. And what they also found was that there was more chemicals released in the rat's brain, And one of those chemicals that they found was oxytocin, which is a chemical that is released when we build relationships. And they could see that with the rats actually interacting as well. So these rats interacted and solved problems in their environment together. And at the end of it, they thought to themselves, well, what other challenges could we give them? And they gave them a challenge to learn to drive. So yeah, that's what neuroscientists get up to when they kind of get to the end of their experiments. But yeah, there was something more interesting. The other group, rats that was put in a normal environment, so not enriched, really plain environment, they didn't get any rewards for doing things. They just got their Fruit Loops. So 4 Fruit Loops a day without having to do anything. They found that these rats weren't really curious in their environments, and they also wasn't really interested in doing anything together, solving anything or working together or anything. And at the end of it, they tried to teach these rats with the exact same process to drive these cars, and they couldn't. They couldn't learn to drive the cars. So one group, after 22 attempts, they managed to get their driver's licenses, and the other group never actually got their licenses. Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. The thing about environments for me is, like, if you take that back into work environment, I don't think it's just when we look at that in our context, it's not just boardrooms or beanbags in our environments or whiteboards or whatever. It's everything that people experience and believe about their world in that company, essentially. Yeah, so that's on that note of starting off with this neuroscience topic. So yeah, this is actually quite an interesting fact. So the average human has about 86 billion neurons in their brain. I don't know who counted that, but I'll just go with that figure. Sounds pretty impressive. So yeah, pretty interesting research. And I wanted to show you how that actually looks like underneath a microscope. So here you can see I'll just go to the screen quickly. Here you can see there's actually cells, and these cells are called neurons, and these neurons actually connect with each other. So essentially, when these cells connect, it is our thinking, doing, and feeling habits essentially forming new pathways. So here you can see that one cell's axon would connect with another cell's dendrite. If we go back to the example of the rats, that chemicals that was released because of the relationships are actually released between these cells, and it sends a signal from one cell to another. So that's kind of how messages are transmitted in our brains. And these cells can grow into different directions, right? So that's actually what's so interesting, because once they grow, they actually refer to that as the synapse strength, so the strength of the pathway. And these pathways, like I mentioned, are our habits and behaviors. But it is our autopilot 95% of the day. This is our default that we are actually falling back to, that we're not actually conscious about. So these pathways are actually super important for us to kind of build in the right direction. So I wanted to just also build on that a bit to give you some more context about this. There was a TED talk from Dr. Kristen Meisenheimer, she's also a neuroscientist. Really interesting talk. If you want to check that out, I really recommend it. So she mentioned that neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt, basically rewire based on a person's thoughts, lifestyle, and environment that allows them to survive and thrive in that environment. And we did discuss the first level of change, which is the chemical level. And that is the initial structure that gets changed. So within that chemical structure, it's actually our behaviors forming and also our short-term memory. When you go over to the structural change, it means that there's different pathways that's actually connecting across each other. And I want you to think about that as like two highways, different highways essentially connecting. It's something like that. And it's the structure is more long-term kind of memory thing for us. And on the functional side, that is our default behaviors and habits. And yeah, that's the three kind of layers that gets formed. So the more often we travel those highways, the more that actually becomes our default way of behaving. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting stuff on the neuroscience, about neuroscience and our habits and behaviors. I'm gonna quickly go on to the next slide here. So this is quite interesting for me, right? So there's this term by behavioral scientists where that's called situationism, and what that is, it's about they believe that our behaviors and our habits are actually impacted by our environment. So, and I put this picture here on this small video here on the right hand side, and it was kind of using the highway analogy, right? So if there's a highway, there's a default pathway, but maybe that highway is blocked. There's something blocking it. And the natural thing for us to do is to follow the next easiest pathway, right? So maybe we go back to an old pathway that's not as established anymore, but that still exists. And that's the thing. So our environment actually has a huge impact on our behaviors and habits. Yeah, so I wanted to make it a bit more personal. So I thought, you know, what example in my life can I actually tell that can, you know, explain this the way I see this on a personal level. So yeah, I'm gonna tell the story when I used to smoke, and I smoked for about 10 years. And what happened was I had two friends, Eric and JJ. So Eric, he was my smoking buddy at the time, and you know we hung out in pubs and had a good time every now and then. And yeah, one day he came to me and he told me, you know what, I think we should try to stop smoking. And I thought, oh, that sounds like something nice to try. You know, I've tried it for 10 years or whatever, and let's try it again. So what happened was at the same time I met another friend, JJ, and he was really into fitness. He was competing and in fitness events and everything. And I thought to myself, you know what, I think I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to train with him and whatever. So I trained with him for a couple of months, and I stayed away from beer and burgers and all that stuff. And I ate broccoli and lettuce and, you know, drank like liters of water and all that healthy stuff. And what happened was after a couple of weeks, I spoke to Eric and he actually started to smoke again. But I managed to, you know, keep away from smoking for those couple of weeks. And I just kept on going to the gym, exercising. And eventually what happened was I completely stopped to smoke. And it's really interesting for me because when I look back at that example, you know, it was, I put myself in a different type of environment. And this is contextual to me, but I think I really knew from all the other times that I failed the reason why I started was because I had a beer in my hand, and then I felt like, well, I want to socialize a bit with my friends now. So, I'm just going to have one smoke. It's okay. But, you end up going back to that old habit after a few nights out. So, yeah, and up until today, I've stopped smoking. So that's really helped me. And I think that's kind of a personal story for me that I could use to relate to, that story of the rats and everything happening in our brains. Yeah. Mike, do you want to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So the interesting thing is about our brains changing. And by the way, just because you've joined the session, we've already started some new changes inside your brain's chemistry, potentially forming new pathways. And that's kind of interesting because it's so neuroplasticity is an individual phenomenon, right? And if you consider what an organization is, it's really a network of individuals, each with their own neuroplasticity involved. So when it comes to change in organizations, what we're actually doing is we're trying to reform the pathways in every person's brain. So this reversion behavior is one of getting triggered by, so like Anton was talking about the smoking, and then being out with a friend having a beer is a trigger then to revert back. And the same kinds of triggers exist in the environments in our organizations. So of course, changing your own habits is one thing. Changing the habits of an organization full of people, often hundreds or thousands of people, is a much grander task. So, and this is kind of where organizational neuroplasticity comes into the picture. Back to you.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm working at a company called Pickpock. So what I did was I wanted to ask the teams, what they've observed and just get some feedback from people actually going through this. And we did this survey and got a couple of results that I wanted to share with you. So it's really interesting. So the number one reason that they believe that they revert back to changes, and they've also seen this, was because of team changes. And I want to iterate this. This is contextual to Pickpock. Maybe in your company there might be different reasons, but maybe this is a common one as well. Maybe you're experiencing the same thing. But for them, at least what they've seen is they've seen that when teams change, when a scrum master, a new scrum master enters the team, or when a new product owner enters the team, or when development team members changes, or when they scale the team, they actually revert back to some of their old practices. So that was pretty interesting. The second reason was because the team coach left the team. So I'm saying team coach because it also depends on what you call scrum masters. In our case, it is scrum masters, but yeah, basically a team coach. And the third one here was low alignment on the practice. So it means that some people might be in shoe and other people's might be in a re state, right? So that kind of alignment that's needed within those teams. And the fourth one here was timeline pressure, and then team lead making a decision. So that might be a lead in a team. Also contextual, might look a bit different in your context, but in our context, there's leads that might make a decision to go back to something else that they're more familiar with or used to. Yeah, pretty interesting. So Mike, I'm going to hand over to you to talk a bit about the scaling topic.
Right. Yeah, so oh wow, there's no echo. Oh, you're on mute. So interestingly, scaling, I had an opportunity to spend a week in an Airbnb with Craig Lyman, who is one of the two guys. He and Bas Vod came up with the LESS framework, which is what, large scale Scrum. So effectively, it's a scaling framework. And you know, he's got a number of rules and patterns and things around the framework. And the first rule of scaling is don't do it, basically, because scaling creates a plethora of problems, right? So when we scale, scaling is growth. And if you ask any 8-year-old or 9-year-old about how it feels to be growing, they'll tell you about their growing pains, right? When the bones are growing and the cartilage and all of this, it's painful. And so it is with organizations. So, and usually what's happening while we're growing the organization is we're discovering the need to change things because it doesn't work like it used to. Which again leads us back into the neuroplasticity world, because now not only are there a whole bunch of new people and new thoughts and ideas, but we have to change the way things work at the same time. And this is very painful. So basically the bigger or the faster we grow and the more we grow, the harder it gets to actually enact any change. So that's the impact on scaling. And actually, Anton, if you go back to the previous slide, we were having a conversation about these slides yesterday. And so we can see, so when you're scaling, take a look at the number one reason for change reversion is the team changes. So often when we start scaling, we start repurposing or changing the composition of teams, because we've got to add people into existing teams or reform new teams. And it's a major change for the individuals involved. So it's kind of interesting how there's a correlation here. Cool. So back to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so that brings us to my conclusion. You know, what I learned from this, and yeah, so there's a couple of things that I learned on this journey. I think the first one that I learned was that rats' brains are 2 grams and human brains are 1.4 kilograms. And the second one is, you know, I think we can use Fruit Loops to change our brains, essentially. And yeah, I think on a serious note, so I think we should start focusing on habits, behaviors, and the environment, right? So really having that system view thinking of what's happening. And you know, when we observe and investigate the habits and behaviors, we need to listen to the stories people tell each other, and you know, actually ask ourselves: is the work environment, essentially the culture, conducive of what we want to achieve at the end of the day? I think that's really important. And then, just before I hand over to Mike, I actually want us to watch this video again, but I want to put out a challenge, and I want to ask you. Yeah, actually,
Nice.
I actually bought some Fruit Loops. So this is a prize. So if you can see the reason why the sheep actually went back into the ditch, if you can spot that, the first person to put that in the chat, yeah, they win a box of Fruit Loops that I'll give to you personally if you're in Wellington. So I'm gonna quickly just play it again, and I want to see if you can spot that.
We have a couple of early contenders already for the prize.
Okay, great. Is there anyone got it? Let's see. So in the chat, you can just put in why you think, oh, the environment hasn't changed. Anything else? Oh, that's it. Awesome. Philippe, you've won a box of Fruit Loops. Great. So I wanted you to just see that, because that is actually what happened, right? The sheep couldn't go in another direction. It was kind of trapped, and because of that, it actually went the opposite way, and we went back. So yeah. On that note, I'm gonna hand over to Mike. Philippe, just add me on LinkedIn, and I'll get in touch with you to give you a box of Fruit Loops.
Thank you. My 5-year-old would love it. And me secretly.
Yeah. Mike? Okay, so are we going to do a quick breakaway? So yeah, during the talk so far, interested to understand what you guys have learned. So we'll just do another quick breakout, have a conversation with people, and see what it is that you've taken away so far. Yeah, good point. So change actually has to make a positive difference somehow in order for it to stick. Well, yes, maybe. I see a lot of negative changes that stick regardless. Or maybe it's a negative norm that remains, and it's hard sometimes even to revert into something positive from that. Perseverance, reinforce the new neural pathways. Exactly right. Repetition. I see a thumbs down from Silke. What's going on there? Yes, okay, thumbs up. Right.
Yeah, no, I think if you put more pressure and just hit against the wall, it just doesn't work.
Oh, right. Yes, there are ways to reinforce. So positive reinforcement, perhaps. So it's kind of like if one's, we've got a new vision, and we tell everyone today, and then tomorrow everyone's forgotten. So without some kind of reinforcement, it's kind of a bit hollow. All right.
Yeah, it can be like acknowledgement even. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And change means change, right? We can't just say things and continue doing the same thing. So, and then that's kind of the hard part, and it's a little bit about where I want to go. So the interesting thing is, if you like, the relationship between leadership and change, and the changes that actually work. There's an incredibly strong relationship to how that works. So so one thing that my organization's been doing, so we're a coaching company, coaching and training, and so we work with a lot of different organizations around the globe, and we've been working on trying to figure out and trying to find better ways to actually make change stick, because it's really hard, as we've kind of identified already. So one of the things to be aware of is that gravity is ever present, right? So I don't know if anyone's seen this. It's an incredible music video. The whole thing was filmed in zero gravity, so nose diving airplanes, basically. Must have been, quite a tricky thing to produce. But the whole idea about gravity is, well, we know what goes up must come down, right? And what we're effectively trying to do in organizations when we're trying to change things is we're actually trying to apply some anti-gravity force field to the existing way of work, right? So it's kind of important to be aware of what are some of the factors of gravity in organizations. And I'll go back to Craig Lyman because he's got some fascinating ideas on organizational change. And his first one, one of his, he calls them Lyman's laws. And one of these laws is that all changes made in an organization will revert within 3 to 5 years. And the reason for that is if you look at the C-level, the C-suite, CEO and so on usually changes every 3 to 5 years. We've got a new CEO, and when that happens, all the new ideas come in, and it's kind of that person's job to change stuff. So all of the changes that we've made in the last season are going to revert. Another form of gravity are those posters we see around. I often see around the halls in organizations. This poster of an eagle soaring over a valley, and there's all these, our company values on these posters. And it's one of the worst things you can possibly do in an organization is to put those things up. The reason is, I don't know if you've ever looked at one of those posters and gone, oh, what a joke. It's not like that here, right? And that starts spawning water cooler conversations of resentment around, it's not like that. And it causes problems. Another key thing, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is inconsistency in messaging. So I've heard a lot and I've seen a lot where the leadership in an organization says, people just don't take ownership. I want them to take ownership, and I believe that, like they truly do want that. The problem is, in the next breath, I see the very same leader standing with a team and taking ownership away from them, telling them how to solve a problem. This is a form, so it's incongruent with what they're trying to achieve. So it's a tragic expression of their own need. It's tragic in the sense that it won't be fulfilled. So these are some of the factors of gravity that prevent change from happening and from sticking. So let's take a look at some anti-gravity, right? So like many good models, the model is either on a 2x2 matrix, or it's on a pyramid. This one's a pyramid, and it's fitting because we're fighting gravity, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid is our experiences. We're experiencing things daily in our lives, and those experiences actually form our beliefs over time. So think about the neuroplasticity, right? So if I'm in a meeting room and I'm being asked what I think, and every time I say what I think, I'm told that I'm wrong, over time, I'm going to start forming the belief that no one is interested in what I have to say. So I'm probably going to act in a different way going forward, right? So the way I act going forward is I'm not going to share my opinion anymore. It's a waste of my breath, right? So our beliefs actually inform our actions. And ultimately, our actions lead to the results that our organization is going to see. And hopefully they take us somewhere towards the goal, right? What are we trying to achieve? So if one thinks about it this way, there's a few more elements here, right? So if we look kind of at this point between beliefs and actions, something really interesting to consider is that it's a decision about how we act, and our decisions are informed by our beliefs. The way we decide, what we decide to do, is informed by our beliefs. And at the bottom half of the pyramid is kind of a representation of culture. So if you consider the experiences are formed from, around how people behave around us, it's our environment. So for the rats, it was their environment that fostered their experiences, right? It's habits, it's rituals. Think about, so many of you might be in Scrum teams or something. There are embedded rituals that we do in order to create new habits. And it's those stories that we tell around the water cooler, right? These all form part of the culture of an organization. So if one looks at it this way, in fact, it's the culture that leads to the results, right? So if we're wanting to change the results, we've probably got to change the culture, right? Easier said than done, right? So if you like, decisions are the inflection point between culture and results. So we need to, maybe there's a clue there about what we need to do. At the top of the pyramid are all the traditional things of tools, processes, roles, responsibilities, and ultimately structure, right? And so coming back to how do we actually change the results? Well, one solution is we can manage the actions of people. So, when someone says, I'm a manager, I say, of what? Are you managing people or are you managing the work? So I'm a strong believer in managing the work and letting the people figure out what to do, right? But managing the actions is, it's a sound strategy. If we're about to career over a cliff, and like decision has to be made and it has to be done now, managing the actions is a very sound choice. It's very apt, right? It's a short-term mechanism for achieving results. And it comes at the cost of the buy-in and the motivation of the people that are delivering, right? So it's a strategy, a good one in certain circumstances, but certainly not in the long term. The other alternative is to lead. And leading in this sense is to actually help change the experiences people are having. So in my boardroom example, where I was asked for my opinion and it was never, I was always shut down. As a leader, I could help change that experience for those people, right? And really get inclusive and really try the ideas that come out. And that would start changing the experiences and the beliefs ultimately of those people and would start leading to different results. So the short story is, if we want to really change the results of an organization in the long term, we need to manage less and we need to lead more, right? So yeah, kind of a busy slide by the end, but hopefully the journey made sense. And what I want to focus on next is this decision point, right? Because we were looking for ways of measuring culture, right? And we've discovered, so it's not possible to design a culture. You can't do it. That's a linear process in your mind. It's like, here's where we are, there's where we need to be, and then these are the 5 steps to get there. It just doesn't work. We're dealing with complexity, right? So we need a different approach. So let me move on. So we've taken the decision point, and what we've done is we have a tool that allows us to record decisions. So anyone in the organization records a decision that was made, along with some, generally that impacts them in some way, along with some signifiers around it or attributes of that decision. So for example, I made the decision versus a manager or a leader made the decision versus an external consultant or something made the decision, right? Another one might be, how did it leave me feeling about this decision, right? Left me feeling terrible. I cried in the corner for a month, or it was the best thing that's happened this year, or, so these are all kind of signifiers around how a decision is made and the impact of the decision. So there's a quick process of capturing decisions, and the result is, and we're using a thing called the competing values framework in order to map those decisions onto a cultural model. And what it tells us is, how is the leadership perceived in the organization versus how do people actually approach the work, versus what do people believe is necessary in order to succeed versus what do people value. And the whole idea is with our approach is, the first principle is to create cultural awareness. What is our culture? And ultimately coherence, right? So if the patterns in these different blocks are kind of, leadership is all the way up in facilitating, and the values are down in efficiency, then the patterns aren't the same, and we have an incoherent culture. So the messaging is not, the messaging and the actions are quite different. And this is not a good thing. So we're able to see, what's going on from a cultural perspective. And then we're also able to take a look over time and see change. So, for example, we had an organization. So this is a span of 24 weeks in total, and during the first 12 weeks, culture was sitting here. So this is a financial institution. They needed a lot of efficiency. They needed a lot of process and control and a lot of competing in the market. So they actually had a very coherent culture back then. All the patterns were kind of fitting in the same areas, those lines, rather than the color blobs. And the color blobs are the now, 24 weeks later, after some intervention. And the problem, even though they had a coherent culture back then, the problems they were experiencing was small boutique institutions were coming in and able to innovate a lot faster, and we're starting to take their clients and make them look bad in the marketplace. So they needed to change to a more innovative culture, which requires a little less control, a little more space to try things and fail and so on. And this is the result. And the whole idea is, this can be used as a feedback loop so that you can really deliberately try experiments to move ultimately the leadership behaviors, the perception thereof, and it always starts with leadership, by the way. The perception of leadership would change first, and then you would see a change in the orientation or the way that people start approaching work differently. And then you would start seeing success stories in that the new way of work. And then people would start valuing this new way of work. So we'd actually be able to track this and define and design and run experiments together with people in the organization and see the impact. Is it taking us in the direction culturally where we want to be? And almost most importantly, we need some kind of feedback loop, because no one's going to be capturing decisions and keep doing that unless they're actually seeing something change. That's really, really important. So final message, and that is to create lasting Whoops. I'll fix the slide before we give them to you. But to create lasting change in our organization requires actually winning the hearts and minds of everyone. And it's a step at a time. There's no quick fix, right? So yeah, so that's it from me. We've got a slide here with some details. You see Einstein's real driver up at the top, myself, and there's a book. So the methods that I've been speaking about now are from Organic Agility, and there's a book online, there's a website. Go and take a look if it's interesting for you.